Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Seventh-day Church of Revelation.
O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings, and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen.
Sorcery. Chances are when you hear the word, it will conjure up pictures of some supernatural power or force, with all its mystical spells and incantations. This association of magic or sorcery with supernatural power and spells goes back to the origins of what we now call pharmacy. For a long period, the religious incantations formed the chief part in the treatment of disease. The researches of Ebers leave little doubt that pharmacy was practiced by one branch of the priesthood of Isis, to whom prescriptions were sent by the physician-priest, who, accompanied by a chanter of litanies or charms, attended the sick. In ancient times, the arts we now know as sorcery were almost exclusively practiced by the priest or religious leader, and were often accompanied by supernatural signs and wonders. To the Bible writers, these arts were known as pharmakeia, or pharmacy, the practice of sorcery. This practice of sorcery, or pharmakeia, was inseparably connected with the religious systems of the ancient world. Medicine for a long time came within the compass of magic and was its inevitable companion. The net result of the bearings of divination on medicine may be summed up in the statement that, as a consequence of the persistent hold maintained by the belief in signs of all kinds, disease became primarily an omen, the interpretation of which on the part of the priest as diviner supplemented the efforts of the priest as exorciser, while the priest as healer availed himself of both these aids to supplement his efforts in the direct treatment of the disease. These three aspects of Babylonian Assyrian medicine, exorcism, divination, and medical treatment, blend together to form a composite picture in which it is not always possible to distinguish the different strains. As we can see from what we just read, sickness was viewed by the ancients as a curse or bad omen placed upon the afflicted by the gods. This curse, it was believed, could only be exorcised or cured by the magic of the priest. Thus, in ancient times, the role of the priest was more than just a religious medium, but that of pharmacist or drug maker and physician. The pharmacy profession can be traced back at least as far as the Sumerian population living in modern-day Iraq. They used medicinal plants such as licorice, mustard, myrrh, and opium. There were separate people who worked to prepare medicines as a separate role from diagnosis and treatment, which was carried out by medics. These precursors to pharmacists also combined their role with that of a priest. Initially, the office of priest, pharmacist, and physician were all combined in one, and these combined arts were called magic, and those who practiced them were known as magi, both of which come from the old Persian word magush, meaning powerful. Among those who believed in God, these arts were generally viewed as sorcery or magic, and were held to be demonic in nature. Not all, however, who practiced magic worshipped false gods. It was certain of these magi, or wise men, who came from Jerusalem in search of the newborn king of the Jews.
Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem.
Among these magi there were some who practiced the natural arts of healing, and steered clear of the supernatural spells and the use of the toxic and often dangerous substances called drugs. These physicians, as they became known, separated themselves from the arts of sorcery and began to practice their healing arts independently from the priesthood. One of the earliest and most well-known among these physicians was the Greek healer known as Hippocrates. His success, together with his genuine care for the sick, earned him the title of the Father of Medicine. The healing arts which he employed, unlike the pharmakeia or sorcery of the pharmacist or sorcerer, relied primarily on natural remedies and the use of various medicinal herbs. This practice became known as therapeia, from which we get our English word therapy. It was also sometimes referred to as iatria, meaning treatment. 3 principles make up the foundation of these healing arts. Number 1, the use of natural remedies, such as herbal teas or decoctions, together with diet and lifestyle to treat disease. Number 2, the disallowing of the use of drugs or toxic substances. And number 3, the sacredness of life, including that of the unborn child. For the physician was forbidden to assist a woman in procuring an abortion. These 3 principles can be readily seen in the oath which Hippocrates required those physicians who trained under him to swear before they were allowed to practice medicine. I will use such diet as will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. Neither will I administer a drug to anyone when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. Similarly, I will not give a woman a pessary to cause abortion, but I will keep my life and my art both pure and holy. Over time, this oath and the practice of the natural healing arts became the standard for physicians throughout Europe, Asia, and all the civilized world. Over the course of the centuries that followed, especially in Europe, certain merchants known as grocers or apothecaries began to deal in generic cures or drugs. These grocers either purchased their cures at a reduced price from a pharmacist or druggist, or they employed one to manufacture them for them. The grocer would then sell the cure to the public. These so-called cures often contained toxic substances, and either had little to no positive effect, or worse yet, caused positive harm to those who took them. It was for this reason that most physicians preferred to prepare their own medicines and were careful to maintain secrecy with regard to their recipes. The modern practice of drug manufacturing has its origin in the late 9th to early 10th centuries AD in Western Europe. According to Campbell, Rhasis, he is said to have been the first to introduce chemical preparations into the practice of medicine. According to Ruska, Rhasis is the man to whom we are indebted for the beginnings of scientific chemistry. The Arabic word alchemia and elixir were originally synonymous, and each was used to denote the agent by which the baser metals could be transmuted into silver or gold. Later, the term alchemia became restricted to indicate the art of transmutation, alchemy, whereas the term elixir or elixir continued to denote the medium by which the transmutation was effected, elixir. Thus was born the science which would produce what we call modern medicine, or more correctly, drugs. The generic name of substances used in medicine, sold by the druggist and compounded by the apothecaries and physicians. Any substance, vegetable, animal, or mineral, which is used in the composition or preparations of medicines. It is also applied to dyeing materials. This medical science progressed further into the 13th century and eventually developed into what we now know as modern chemistry. Arnauld of Villanova was one of the most progressive physicians of the late Middle Ages. He was a teacher of medicine at the University of Montpellier for more than a decade. Influenced naturally, like his colleagues, by Arabic medical science, he was one of the first physicians in Europe to recognize the importance of chemistry for medicine, leaning, however, in the direction of alchemistic speculation and mysticism. Thus, pharmacy developed under several diverse influences. This science quickly spread throughout Europe and fueled a lucrative business for those grocers who sold these medicines or drugs. It was for this reason that the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick II, issued an edict in the 13th century, part of which was designed to prohibit the dangerous union of pharmacy or drug making with that of natural medicine. Edward Kemers, in his History of Pharmacy, gives us the following details concerning Frederick's edict. Forbidding any business relation between physician and pharmacist, the law tried to stabilize the ethical principle that only professional service and not exploitation of the sick should be the function of the healing professions. Unfortunately, as with most of men's laws, they are made to be broken, and that is precisely what happened. Over the next 5.5 centuries, the pharmacists gradually formed business partnerships with those physicians who were willing to compromise their oath and recommend to their patients the pharmacist's drugs, in return for the physician getting a portion of the sale. Pharmacists, or drug makers, also incorporated certain addictive substances, such as alcohol, opium, nicotine from the tobacco plant, and cocaine from the coca plant, into their medicines, in order to increase their profit by ensuring a long-term client for their drugs. In order to make sure other pharmacists wouldn't get in on the profits by formulating their own generic version of a particularly popular drug, they kept the ingredients secret. It was in this way that these so-called remedies, or medicines, became known as nostrums, that is, a medicine the ingredients of which are kept secret for the purpose of restricting the profits of sale to the inventor or proprietor. It was concerning these very drugs, or nostrums, which the Lord's messenger declared, "The poisons contained in many so-called remedies create habits and appetites that mean ruin to both soul and body. Many of the popular nostrums, called patent medicines, and even some of the drugs dispensed by physicians, act a part in laying the foundation of the liquor habit, the opium habit, the morphine habit, that are so terrible a curse to society." As bad as things had become in the practice of medicine during the 14th to 18th centuries, it was to reach even deeper and darker waters by the middle of the 19th century. In the 19th to 20th centuries, the science of chemistry and chemical engineering was to take center stage in the development of what we now know as modern medicine, and the two leading actors in this drama were Germany and the United States of America. With the discovery of coal tar, petroleum, and denatured alcohol, the pharmaceutical industry was to enter into its golden age of prosperity. It began in 1863 with the establishment of a small dye manufacturing and distributing company in Frankfurt, Germany, by the name of Bayer. From 1863 to the turn of the 20th century, the pharmaceutical industry had grown to become the single largest industry in the world. Germany was the leading and most powerful nation in Europe at the time of the outbreak of the First World War. During the war, the pharmaceutical manufacturers in Germany saw an opportunity to capitalize on warfare by development of chemical weapons. After Germany's defeat at the hands of the other European powers, the powerful German pharmaceutical companies, in order to survive the economic collapse of the German economy and industry, decided to form a cartel called the Interessengemeinschaft Farben Industrie, or the dye industry interest group, called IG Farben for short. This interest group, or cartel of pharmaceutical manufacturers and suppliers in Germany, was established in 1925 and played a leading role in the resurrection of the German economy after World War I. Before and during the Second World War, Germany was again a world leader in scientific and industrial development, and one of the leading reasons for this was the booming pharmaceutical industry, led by the IG Farben. The IG Farben took advantage of the war to develop a synthetic oil manufacturing plant in Auschwitz, which heavily utilized prisoners of war as slave labor, in order to reduce Germany's dependence on foreign oil. The many prison camps throughout Germany also became the testing ground for experimental medicine and the development of pharmaceutical drug-based treatments of disease, particularly mental disease. After the defeat of Germany at the hands of the Allies, it was decided by the Allied powers that the IG Farben was to be dismantled in order to prevent Germany from becoming a military threat to its neighbors once again. However, rather than dismantling the pharmaceutical cartel, it was instead absorbed into the growing pharmaceutical industries of Europe and the US, primarily Britain, France, and the United States. Thus it was that these nations became the industry leaders in the manufacturing and distribution of pharmaceutical drugs of all kinds. These pharmaceutical and petrochemical industries saw the medical field as an untapped market for their chemicals and drugs. The story of this takeover of medicine by Big Pharma has been summed up well in the following from Ivan Fraser and Mark Beeston's work entitled The Brotherhood. In the early half of the 20th century, petrochemical giants organized a coup on the medical research facilities, hospitals, and universities. The Rockefellers did this by sponsoring research and donating monetary gifts to U.S. universities and medical schools where research was drug-based, and further extended this policy to foreign medical establishments via their International Education Board. Those who were not drug-based were refused funding and were soon dissolved in favor of the more lucrative pharmaceutical-based project. In 1939, the Drug Trust Alliance was formed by the Rockefeller Empire and IG Farben. The Rockefeller Empire, in tandem with the Chase Manhattan Bank, now owns over half of the USA's pharmaceutical interest and is the largest drug manufacturing combine in the world. Since the war, the drug industry has steadily netted an ever-increasing profit from sales of drugs to become the second largest manufacturing industry in the world, next to the arms industry, also owned by the selfsame elite agencies. Today, healthcare is a multi-billion-pound industry worldwide, with ever-increasing expenditure by taxpayers into the system, which funnels the majority of this staggering profit into the hands of the drug manufacturers. These companies now control the vast majority of healthcare and set the standards for the practice of medicine in all developed countries. Like a python, the pharmaceutical industry began to coil itself around the medical field, putting it in a death embrace, slowly but surely squeezing the life and money out of it and its patients. There were no altruistic motives behind this takeover of natural medicine by Big Pharma. No greater purpose lay at the heart of it all than a cold and calculated cash grab. It was simply the love of money.
For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
From the time of its initial conquests during and after the World Wars, the pharmaceutical industry has netted untold billions of dollars from the suffering and sickness in our world. To get a grasp of just how lucrative this business has been for the pharmaceutical industry, one needs only to consider the drug sales in the last decade here in the U.S. In 2011, the amount that Americans spent on pharmaceutical drugs was an enormous $72 billion. That amount has not doubled, nor tripled, no, not even quadrupled. Rather, it has seen a staggering 11-fold increase in just over a decade to an almost unbelievable $858 billion in 2022. By the time that this short video will have been published in 2024, it will have likely risen to $1 trillion a year business. It is no wonder that we have seen an unprecedented increase in the number of pharmaceutical companies entering into this almost bottomless pit of a market. Yet the financial rape of the people of this world pales in comparison to the other and grosser side effects of the takeover of natural medicine by Big Pharma. What is perhaps the worst side effect of it all is the catastrophic rise in medically caused deaths around the world. In 1994, a doctor by the name of Lucien Leap published an article in the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, entitled Error in Medicine. In this article, he put an unwelcome spotlight on an ever-growing crisis within the modern medical field. In the book Death by Medicine by Gary Null, the author quotes the following from Dr. Leap's research. As little as 5% and no more than 20% of iatrogenic, that is, medically caused, events are ever reported. This implies that if medical errors were completely and accurately reported, we would have an annual iatrogenic death toll much higher than 794,936. In 1994, Leap said his figure of 180,000 medical mistakes resulting in death annually was equivalent to 3 jumbo jet crashes every 2 days. Our considerably higher figure is equivalent to 6 jumbo jets falling out of the sky each day. The number of iatrogenic deaths using an average rate of injury and his 14% fatality rate would be 1,189,576. Leap acknowledged that the literature on medical error is sparse, and we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. He said that when errors are specifically sought out, reports are distressingly high. He cited several autopsy studies with rates as high as 35 to 40% of misdiagnoses causing death. He also commented that an intensive care unit reported an average of 1.7 errors per day per patient, and 29% of those errors were potentially serious or fatal. Leap calculated the error rate in the intensive care unit study. First, he found that each patient had an average of 178 activities, staff, procedure, medical interactions a day, of which 1.7 were errors, which means a 1% failure rate. This may not seem like much, but Leap cited industry standards showing that in aviation, a 0.1% failure rate would mean 2 unsafe plane landings per day at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. In the U.S. Postal Service, a 0.1% failure rate would mean 16,000 pieces of lost mail every hour. And in the banking industry, a 0.1% failure rate would mean 32,000 bank checks deducted from the wrong bank account every hour. This paper, published by Dr. Leap, revealed that medical malpractice is in fact the leading cause of death in the United States. This fact sends shivers down my spine when I think that the very field we are taught to entrust our lives to when it comes to sickness and disease is in fact the leading cause of death. And what is more is that we have only scraped the surface of this problem. As Dr. Leap himself declared, as little as 5% and no more than 20% of iatrogenic events are ever reported. This means that anywhere from 80% to 95% of all medically caused events go unreported. And if, as Dr. Leap's paper showed, that an average of around 14% of these are fatal, we are looking at something far worse than the COVID-19 or the influenza viruses combined. Something that approaches the level of the bubonic plague that ravaged Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries and took the lives of untold millions. As sobering as these facts are, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, for we have only briefly touched upon the subject of legal drugs. We have yet to even consider the horrific effects which illegal drugs have had and are having upon our society. And all this is due to what inspiration calls sorcery, or the manufacturing, selling, and use of the toxic substances we call drugs. It is no wonder the Lord through the Apostle John declared,
But the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death.
I do not share these facts to bring shame or reproach upon the honest and sincere men and women who are part of our medical field. I respect and admire those who, from a sincere desire to help their fellow human beings, have chosen the medical field. I believe true medicine is a blessing and not a curse to our world. It is not the individual men and women that are to be blamed for the condition of modern medicine, but the medical system itself. The facts show the sobering truth that the medical field has been entirely corrupted by the love of money, and its soul has been bought out by the pharmaceutical industry. I know that there may be God-fearing men and women who are part of the medical field who may be watching this and thinking to themselves, "What am I to do?" To such I would say, do the very best you can, without compromising your faith in God or subverting your conscience as to what is right and good. As with those who went before you, there will come a time when you must choose between what is right and what is convenient. We will all be confronted with the choice of compromising our conscience and faith in doing what is right versus closing our eyes to evil in order to secure ourselves a job or place within society. No one of us can make that choice for another. We must all search our own hearts and answer for ourselves when the time comes. I can only hope and pray that we shall all make the right choice when that time comes for us. It is my hope and prayer that we may all heed God's call to us today.
And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues."
If you've been blessed by this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. To support Seventh-day Church of Revelation, visit revelation.org.